A Patrick Sycamore story, Skardofolde, Field of Shadows, by Dakota Storm Bogan Thompson. Part 1. Liverpool, a place of Celtic culture, history and architectural wonder. The city is also known for its religion and its ability to welcome anyone who decides to live there. In recent years, a huge blanket of violence and death has fallen upon the city. Murders seem to occur for no reason. Stalkers wander the streets. Gangs of drug dealers kill people if they try to leave their group. All throughout the city markings had appeared. An eye, painted in black. The eye of the devil. The Catholic Church has tried valiantly to destroy the evil, but has failed. It is believed that weakness in a soul can allow it to be corrupted by evil. If this evil is not removed, it damages the soul permanently, and causes its owner to do things that it would not usually do. Famous examples of this soul tainting are people such as Vlad the Impaler and Hitler, both of which allowed demons to inhabit their bodies. An old friend in Liverpool had witnessed a terrifying sight. He saw a woman eviscerated in broad daylight. In his letter to me, I suspected that he knew why this had happened. One of his sentences was written mysteriously and said, "People are used to a blood moon at night, but not during the day." I have for many years forced evil beings back to the inferno of hell, captured them in specially constructed containers, and have had many dealings with phantoms and cruel ghosts. I have led trails for the police to cults of murderous Satanists and pagans. It was while trying to figure out why my Liverpool friend's letter had had that mysterious sentence written in it that my home phone began to ring. I'd had that telephone for 25 years. It had never broken. I was always fascinated by the way it had never worn out. I picked up the receiver and said, "Hello, who is it?" A woman's voice replied, "Hello, my name is Fiona O'Trill. Is this the number of Patrick Sycamore?" "It is," I replied. "What can I do for you?" "It's my cafe. There's something going on. The chairs and tables keep moving." "How long has this activity been occurring?" "It's been happening for several months. Customers told me how their cups kept moving and thought that it was quite funny. But the other day, someone had their arm and leg cut." "Where is this cafe?" I asked. "We're just off Sandfield Road, Liverpool." "Have you found any peculiar markings inside your establishment?" "Yes," replied Fiona. "An eye painted in black." "I will get there as fast as I possibly can," I said. "Don't let anyone into your cafe. I believe that you have a low-level demon trying to become more powerful." "How do you know all this?" Fiona asked. "That is for me to know," I replied, before replacing the receiver. If this demon was trying to become more powerful, then that meant it was feeding on the life force of Fiona's customers. Once a demon becomes powerful enough, it will find a host and then use it to murder people and take a large portion of their victim's life force. The victim's soul is traumatized by this and is sent to purgatory, where it remains until it has recovered and it is allowed to go to the higher dimension of heaven. When these low-level demons begin to strengthen, they test their power by hurting unsuspecting people. What I didn't realize at the time was that this trip to remove a low-level demon would lead me to the trail of an even more dangerous threat. I took with me a suitcase of clothes and my equipment, which I stored in a large wooden, iron-clad box blessed by Pope Innocent X. I also took with me a special book compiled over the centuries called the Codex. I also took with me my dog, a large Rottweiler called Maximilian, who had been blessed by 3 priests. Max had saved me several times in the past by dragging me away from danger. I loaded my cases into my black Hillman Hunter GLS and set off to Liverpool. I had organised a hotel room for several days and had hoped that after ridding this low-level demon from Fiona's establishment, I would be able to investigate the city. I had long wondered what had caused the crimes. Was it a cult that had summoned a plague of demons? Had the devil finally decided to make an attack on a religious hub and corrupt it? If he had, he was succeeding and I would stop him. I had stopped his minions numerous times in Britain and other countries, from Belgium to Africa, Uganda to Palestine. Many years ago, I had been in Germany, and had fought with the demon with the assistance of a priest from the Vatican, and had struck fear into the creature's very being when he told me that the Book of Souls that was watched over by the devil's second in command held no thread with my essence in it. According to old records, the book can tell if someone's soul is going to be tainted and damned. In a way, it predicts the future. Every demon has read this book, and when they meet someone whose name was written in gold, which signifies that the person's soul is untouchable by evil forces, then they try desperately to kill that person. I had been attacked by many demons, and all had failed to kill me. Liverpool needed to be healed by cutting out the demoniac infection. Everybody else had failed, and I wondered if I would be able to stop something that nobody else had been able to, if I was pressed into action. Only time would tell. Part 2. I arrived at my hotel at about 3:30 in the afternoon, where I quickly unpacked my things and drove straight for Fiona's cafe. Fiona came to meet me, and she explained that her staff had created a name for the being that haunted the establishment: Alicia. As soon as I stepped through the door, I could feel something watching me. "I'm afraid that all of your furniture needs to be moved outside," I said. "But why?" asked Fiona. "Because otherwise I'll get hurt." After some 15 minutes of moving the furniture into the street, I took out my case of equipment from the back seat of my car and readied myself for the fight. I must not be disturbed, I instructed Fiona. I told Fiona to lock the door of the cafe and sit in my car with the window open until she heard me tap 3 times slowly on the inside of the door. When this was done, I stepped into the center of the establishment's main room and took off my coat. "Who are you?" I asked the empty air. Nothing happened. "Who are you?" I repeated. A gust of strong wind struck me. "Tell me your name, demon," I said. Before I could make any more demands, a spectral figure formed in front of me. "Who wishes to know?" asked the demon. "Patrick Sycamore," I replied. "I know of you," said the demon. "My name is Vita Masticando." "I see," I said. "You're a low-level soul absorber. Interesting." "What are you going to do?" asked the demon. "I'm going to send you back to the pit," I replied. "Are you going to try to stop me, or will you make no fuss?" "I will not cause trouble," said Masticando. "But I have a message for you." "What is the message?" "You are wanted at Newsham Park Hospital. Go to Ward G. You will find something of interest to you." "Thank you," I said. I took a bottle of holy water from my case and splashed it at the demon's feet. Masticando flinched and hopped from left to right. I then lit a bundle of parsley, which I used for warding off evil spirits, and wafted the smoke around the demon, and he disappeared back to the infernal pit. I packed away my equipment and tapped thrice on the door window. Fiona unlocked the door, and I helped her carry in the cafe's furniture. "Is it gone?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "He left without much trouble. I must visit Newsham Park Hospital. There is something that I must see." "What is it?" Fiona asked. "I don't know yet. I just don't know." I wondered if a trap had been set for me. If so, I would arm myself. If a trap had been set, then demons would use possessed victims to attack me. Newsham Park Hospital had originally served as an orphanage in Victorian times, and was later used for medical purposes and a mental asylum. The hospital had closed its doors in 1997. Paranormal activity has been recorded in the building, mostly beds moving and doors closing. I had a feeling that the activity towards me would be a little more aggressive. There is a story about a female nurse who regularly reported strange sightings whilst working with patients. She was found dead on one of the wards. Visitors to the hospital have bared witness to apparitions and creatures that seemed inhuman. When the hospital was still being used, some patients reportedly mentioned children, and would regularly begin talking to people who weren't even there. Some would call them mad, when in truth, they were actually seeing a clearer reality. Demons prey on weak souls and feed on them. If a person has seemingly gone mad, it is in fact the soul attempting to release itself from the demon's grasp. Sometimes they succeed, but most fail. Patients who see children are in fact either seeing a lost spirit, a demon trying to trick its victim into allowing the soul to trust it, or sometimes it is in fact an angel. This may seem strange that angels would use the image of children to visit people who they are trying to save from the sharp claws of a demon, but they use this form to portray innocence. You may wonder how I know all of this. The answer is simple. The Codex contains all the information of many generations. Only 3 of these books were ever made, 2 of which were copies, and over time were destroyed. I possess the last book, the original. Some say that its first page was written before the coming of Christ. Having paid some scientists to carbon date a snippet of the first page, they revealed to me that the book was in fact some 4,000 years old. They soon tried to take the book away from me, but after much difficulty I managed to keep it. The scientists soon revealed themselves to be members of a cult who had been waiting for the book to resurface so that they could destroy it and spread its ashes to create a portal to hell. I had to fight them when they invaded my home, and had the police come round as soon as I had stopped them by trapping them in the cellar. According to reports by visitors, Ward G is especially haunted, where people have felt uneasy and have heard dragging noises in the dining room while nobody is in there. Very mysterious. As I approached the building's gate, it swung open and allowed me to pass through. Max and I approached the building cautiously. I was armed with a spray bottle of holy water and a silver crucifix. I also took with me a sheathed sacred knife that had been used against a demon general. The front door of the hospital was huge and made of some sort of hard wood, which made it heavy to move on its old hinges. The corridors were old and decrepit and dark. A feeling of pure evil seemed to hang in the air. The floor was covered in a thick film of dust, as were the abandoned beds. Large spiders sat in elaborate webs, but no flies decorated their masterpieces. An office door near me slammed closed. I ignored it. Demons feel uneasy if their tricks do not scare their prey. It took me about half an hour of slow, cautious searching for Ward G, and I was wary of walking through it. Max began to growl deeply and became rigid. We walked down the ward with plumes of dust rising with our footfall. Max stopped and barked. I always trust Max's instinct because it has never failed to keep me from danger. "You came," said a voice. "I did," I replied. "Who are you?" "We are members of the Umbra cult. We have been tasked with killing you and your mutt. I trust that you will put up a good fight." "Of course," I replied. I let Max off of his leash and waited for the attack. "Well," I said, "are you trying to kill me with suspense?" From beneath the abandoned beds of Ward G crawled several large men, clad only in fur trousers. I sprayed them with holy water and watched as they shook and convulsed before coming towards me. One of the cultists grabbed me by the shoulder and struck me in the center of my chest. I staggered back as they began to close in around me. Max, a well-trained dog, leapt at the throat of the largest assassin. The cultist tried to release the Rottweiler's jaws from his throat, but only enraged his attacker even more. Max dropped from the assassin as he fell and waited for the next cultist to attack. "Let's make this memorable, shall we?" I said. I rushed forward, pulling the sacred knife from its sheath, and made for the closest assassin. I punched him once in the stomach before I pushed the knife into his shoulder. "You're not very impressive," I said. "I've fought low-level demons who are tougher than you." A man in a red suit came out of the shadows from the far end of the ward and said, "Allow me to impress you then." The suited man began to shake, and I sensed a demon of great power had decided to join the fight. The suit tore apart, and its occupant's body expanded into a huge mass of muscle. "Oh dear," I muttered to myself. I unscrewed the spray pump bottle and threw its contents at the demon, which began to laugh. The demon's back burst open, and a set of huge, bloody bat wings revealed themselves. I turned and ran in the other direction. A-class demons are extremely awkward to get rid of, but this was ridiculous. This creature of the dark was more powerful than any I'd seen before. Max and I just managed to get outside when I heard a loud crash of breaking glass. I took a small bottle of holy water from the car, and I turned to face my attacker. The demon lifted me into the air with huge clawed feet and laughed cruelly before saying, "I'm going to drop you into the city so everyone can see you as a failure." I grabbed hold of the demon's left leg and twisted as hard as I could. I felt the bone crack loudly and the winged horror yelped in pain. We flew higher and higher until we must have been 300 feet in the air. The city became ominous as we flew above it. I stabbed the creature in its damaged leg with the sacred knife, and it screamed. "I will not die so easily," I yelled. I felt the claws begin to release, and I held on with the sacred knife and my right hand, and slowly began to climb up onto the monstrosity's body. "What are you doing?" demanded the demon. "Trying to kill you," I replied. I stabbed it in the back of the neck and slashed one of its wings. We began to descend swiftly, and I clambered onto the demon's chest, where it tried to savagely tear my face, but missed by millimeters. I forced the wings into a twisted position, and we turned in mid-air. We were aimed directly at an open-topped double-decker bus, and I forced the demon, who was still trying to pry me off of him, to spread his bat wings to maximum extension to slow our fall. We landed in the walkway of the open-topped bus, and several women yelled out. Someone shouted out, and I heard them ask if the creature was a demon. "Very much so," I called. "Will somebody kindly help me in pinning this abomination to the floor?" Several large men, dock workers I guessed, held the demon's legs and arms, while several stood on its wings. I carved a square in the demon's chest and tore off the skin, exposing the black heart and other organs. I pulled out the cork from the bottle of holy water and emptied its contents into the demon's chest before pushing in the silver crucifix I had taken into the hospital. "Move back," I yelled. "This is going to be extremely unpleasant." The demon began to shriek, and its skin bubbled, its sharp ears began to bleed, and the muscles expanded to a gross size. "Granny Rambles will kill you for this," screamed the demon as his skin tore and shredded. "She can try," I replied quietly, "but she will fail as you have." Several of the women on the bus had opened umbrellas. I told everyone to hide behind them. As I took shelter behind a portly woman's transparent pink umbrella, I watched the demon grow and grow until it exploded in a grotesque display of destroyed flesh. "Usually I bring my own," I said to the portly woman. The driver of the bus stopped his vehicle and came up the stairs. "What on God's green earth just happened here?" he asked in a thick Liverpool accent. "Oh," I replied, "just a demon exploding in a bloody mess. Could I buy a ticket to Newsham Park Hospital, please?" "Why?" said the bus driver. I need to collect my dog and my car." The driver nodded and went back to his driving seat after I paid him. What a day, I said to myself. What a day. Part 3. After collecting my car from Newsham Park Hospital and asking the cook to look after Max, who assured me that he would be well fed, I rested in the hotel. Who was Granny Rambles? Somebody knocked on my door, and when I went to see who it was, I discovered a large cardboard box. The box was sealed with duct tape, and I used my Swiss Army knife to cut through the tape. To my surprise, I found my recently exploded adversary's head grinning at me. At first, I thought it was dead, and I was extremely startled when it suddenly spoke. "You are frustrated, Granny Rambles," said the demon's head. "How so?" I asked. "You are causing a disturbance in our plans," replied the head. "You will soon be dealt with." "In what manner?" "Death." The severed head suddenly began to throb, and its jaws opened to a huge size, and I saw a bundle of rods attached to a digital timer. Granny Rambles had used the demon's head to transport a bomb. Very clever. I had 15 seconds to deal with the threat. In that time, I opened my window and threw the box through it as the timer struck 5 seconds. As it flew through the air, I watched the box explode in a bloody mess of flesh and cardboard. Not clever enough, I muttered to myself. I closed my window and took my laptop from its case. I connected to the hotel's internet service and began to probe for information about Granny Rambles. I quickly found that there was only one article on the internet, which was in Merseyside's most famous newspaper, the Liverpool Echo. I made my way to their headquarters, number 5 St. Paul's Square. The building was full of huge glass windows which seemed quite dark. I went into the lobby and spoke with the secretary, a pleasant enough girl, but she sounded as though her mouth was full of marbles. She spoke rapidly to the chief editor of the paper and called a male staff member to take me up to his office. Just before we went to the lift, a man in joggers and a black hooded sweatshirt came into the lobby. He had an instantly recognizable object in his hands, an AK-47. "Behind the desk," I yelled. We jumped over the secretary's desk just in time as the gunman opened fire. A spray of bullets hit the steel desk, causing them to ricochet around the room. "Granny Rambles wants you dead," yelled the gunman. "Granny Rambles?" gasped the secretary. "I think she's annoyed at me for killing her pet demon." "You did what?" said the male staff member. "I blew up one of her demons. Big ugly wing thing," I said. I opened the secretary's drawers and found a paperweight with a picture of a cat inside of it. I jumped over the desk as the approaching gunman came close, and I landed a blow to his right temple, which sent him sprawling. The gunman lay completely unconscious, and I bound his hands and feet with his shoelaces. "I think I'm ready to meet your chief editor now," I said to the male staff member. The man nodded and shakily escorted me to the lift. We walked down a well-carpeted corridor until we reached a large wooden door. The staff member, whose name I learned was Nigel, left me with instructions that I could go in. The chief editor was a short, heavy man who was dressed in a loose suit and had a glass eye. "Hello, my name is William Maguire. Please call me Bill. I've just finished looking over tomorrow's issue. Terrible stuff that's going on at the moment. Murder, rapes, mutilations. Sometimes I wonder if it will ever end. Please take a seat." "I'm here to ask if I can look over your records," I said, sitting down into a comfortable leather armchair. "Of course," said Bill. "What would you like to see? We've got obituaries, death certificates, addresses of the dead, cemetery records, and 3 copies of our paper leading back to the year 1879. What's your name, by the way?" The editor had an air of relaxed easiness with a trace of rough stubbornness, and he lit a cigarette which he'd taken from a mangled box. "My name is Patrick Sycamore. Please call me Pat." "Want one?" asked Bill, offering me a cigarette. "Yes, please," I answered. I lit the cigarette and took in a large drag, letting the smoke fill my lungs. It's amazing how breathing in burning dried tobacco can make a person feel so relaxed. We sat in silence for a few moments, smoking our cigarettes, when Bill said, "You seem like a fine enough man. There's not many people like you left, so come straight to the point. Who are you, and what do you want to look at?" "I'm a paranormal investigator of sorts. People ask me to determine threats, and I get rid of corrupt entities. A friend of mine sent me a letter referring to a blood moon appearing during the day. My reason for being here is of the greatest importance. I need to find reports of these mysterious blood moons and find out everything available on a woman called Granny Rambles," interrupted Bill. He did this so quietly that I wondered at the reason why I'd stopped talking. "Exactly," I said. "Children get told about witches through stories," said Bill. "People all over the world think they're just folklore and myths based on the Wiccan. For the most part they're right, but there are witches in this world, terrible creatures whose souls must have come from the very bowels of hell. Granny Rambles, she's a tough woman to track down. There's no birth certificate, no death certificate, only scraps. A short time ago an article was printed in our newspaper about Skardofolde. That's where she does her deeds of doom." Bill had stopped smoking his cigarette and was staring ahead at the wall as if he was reading what he was saying from his very brain. I had a feeling that that was exactly what he was doing. "Her actual name is Helen Green. She lived in a cottage on the outskirts of Gattaca. Apparently, she had the ability of astral projection. People used to come to her for help, mostly medical. She was well over the age of 80 when she was last seen. That was 1963. She had a massive head of hair. People said that she had it piled on her head in some sort of odd bun. Somebody saw her when she was in Skardofolde, doing one of her terrible rituals, and they said that her hair nearly reached her ankles. He died 2 days later." "Why do you want to look for records of her?" "She's become a threat to me, and I have suspicions that she may have something to do with the terrible things happening in Liverpool," I replied. "I can tell you anything you want to know about her. She killed my brother when he was 10. He went into Skardofolde at night and came back covered in warts and dying from a closing throat. I'll welcome any opportunity to take her down." "What does Skardofolde mean?" I asked. "Field of Shadows. The word has its origins in Saxon. The place is just off Yew Tree Road and Dowsfield Lane, near Calderstones Park. A lot of people have died as a consequence of going into that field. It looks like a normal enough place, but there's something about it that doesn't feel right. I've tried to work it out for years. Granny Rambles knows a lot," said Bill. "An awful lot. But there's one thing that she doesn't know. I have her photograph." "A photograph?" I said. "I'll show it to you," said Bill, taking out his wallet. He took out the photograph and turned it towards me. The picture was that of an old woman standing naked around a fire with several other people, pointing at the photographer. Her hair was just above her ankles, and her face was one that has been etched onto my memory for the rest of my life. It was incredibly old. The eyes were dark, and the cheeks were thin. It was a terrible sight. "Dear God," I said, "that's horrible." "That photograph is the reason why my brother died. He wanted to prove what was going on," said Bill, putting the picture back into his wallet. "Tell me what to do," Bill said. "I'll help you. We need to find records of last year's kidnappings of young girls and children around the Skardofolde area. Then we can see how many there were in 1 month. That way we can figure out when her ritual is." Bill walked over to a framed picture on the wall of his office and swung it to one side, revealing a small lockbox. "I'm one step ahead of you. Every month I keep a check of how many kidnappings are committed in that area. Unsolved ones, that is." "How many?" I asked. 3 in one day. They always occur on the 20th of each month." "Will you accompany me to my car? I believe I know what the reason is for 3 victims at a time." Bill put on his bowler hat and we walked to the lift. I thought it odd that he wore a bowler. Perhaps it was something that he had always done. As the lift descended in its shaft, I thought about the photograph. It was an old photograph. Granny Rambles was also extremely old. These thoughts confirmed which ritual she was performing. Before we left, Bill stopped in at an office to tell its occupant that the newspaper for the next day was suitable for publishing and that he needed to leave early because of family matters. When we got into the car, I drove us to a cafe. Before leaving the car, I took a large lead-lined case from the boot. I ordered 2 Earl Grey teas and a raspberry donut for us both, and we ate our confectionaries in silence. "What's in the case?" asked Bill. "I'll show you." I placed the case on the table and opened it. Bill's eyes went wide. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. "That's a copy of the Codex of Demons, and all things dark," said Bill. "I read about it years ago." I flipped through the ancient pages for a few moments before turning my findings towards him. "This ritual," I began, "is one of the most deadly." "What is it?" Bill asked. "This ritual takes 200 years to complete. It allows the person who performs it to gain incredible powers. These include making themselves look a certain way and obtaining peculiar strength. This ritual allows the person to cause evil across a large area, and then they feed off of the energy caused by the corruption of its victims' souls." "What's the end result of the ritual?" said Bill. "In Granny Ramble's case, if she completes the ritual, then she will gain immortality, become the wife of Lucifer, and become Queen of Hell. She will also cause the earth to be infested with demons, which in turn will bring about the end of the world." "We've got to stop her," Bill stated. "We will," I said. "I have a plan. Will you help me?" "On my honor," said Bill, "I'll do anything you ask of me." "I need you to collect as much parsley as you possibly can. It may be necessary if my plan doesn't work." "I'll get straight on it," Bill said, getting up. "I'll call a taxi and travel to all of the supermarkets that way. I'll collect as much petroleum and diesel and lighter fuel as I can," I said. "I'll meet you tomorrow on Bold Street." "Why tomorrow?" Bill asked. "Because tomorrow is the 21st. All rituals involving kidnapping are performed in the night of the next day." "Understood." "Let's go then," I said. "We have much to do, and only a day to do it in." Part 4. I collected several containers of petrol and diesel from a number of fuel stations, as well as several tins of lighter fuel. It was expensive work, but it would be worth it. I hid my fuel in the back of my car under a blanket before I went into my hotel. I had a beef burger followed by an ice cream sundae for my dinner. While eating my dinner, I observed a tall man in a black suit and a matching felt fedora hat, watching me from the drinks bar. I felt uneasy in his gaze, but didn't show it. After I'd finished my meal, I went to the bar and ordered a brandy with lemon. The tall man who had been staring at me walked over to my side and ordered a rum and water. While the barman made the tall man's drink, I asked, "Who are you?" The tall man looked at me and replied, "I make sure that people don't get in the way of specific plans." I turned my face towards the tall man and stared at him hard. His cheeks were gaunt, and he had a long, thin nose. His face was hard and wrinkled, his eyes were dark and sunken, and he seemed almost demonic. His height was around 6 feet 7 inches compared to my 6 feet 2 inches. "What is your name?" I asked. "Straw," replied the tall man. "Vincent Straw." "What kind of trap will you be laying out to kill me?" I asked. "Quick and deadly, or slow and drawn out?" "Neither," replied Vincent. "The activities in Liverpool are not of my design. Granny Rambles is not one of my followers. I have been watching her rituals recently. I suspect that you know of her intentions as I do." "Indeed I do," I replied. "I will make certain arrangements to make sure that none of my myrmidons hinder your task." "She cannot be allowed to succeed," said Vincent. "We will meet again." "When?" I said. "When the time is right," replied Vincent. The tall man drank his drink and left the bar. "Friend of yours?" asked the barman. "No," I replied. "He's just an acquaintance." I finished my drink and went to my room. I had a feeling that my new acquaintance would make sure that my plan would be completed without error. A very distinct feeling. Part 5. Bill was waiting outside the church of St. Luke on Bolt Street with several shopping bags full of parsley when I pulled up in my car. I helped the newspaper editor load his shopping into the back seat, and we set off for Yew Tree Road. "What's the plan?" asked Bill. "We go to Skardofolde and place bundles of parsley in the bushes. These bundles we can light later, if necessary, to cleanse the area of any corrupt beings. I've collected lots of fuel for some very special and confusing effects." "What kind of effects?" said Bill. "Burning earth effects," I replied. "Granny Rambles won't be able to figure out what is going on. She'll either think that her rituals have worked, or that Lucifer has come to get rid of her because he doesn't want her." We drove in silence for about 40 minutes before we reached Skardofolde. The tension was intense. I parked the car on Dowsfield Road and we strode into the field of shadows with our equipment. Bill placed bundles of parsley into the bushes around the area, while I used a small spade to dig holes in the ground so that I could place the tins of lighter fuel in them. I used some string soaked in diesel to link the tins of lighter fuel into a star shape. The string would act as a complex fuse, so that when the ritual fire was burning, it would light the cord that I'd left sticking out of the ground, where there was a black disk of scorched earth, and cause the lighter fuel tins to explode. When Bill had finished concealing the parsley in the bushes, we dug small trenches in the ground all over the field, and soaked some of them in petrol and others in diesel before we filled them in again. These trenches' patterns were chaotic in shape and were designed to confuse and cause panic. All of the trenches were connected under the ground by a fuse of diesel-soaked string, which we would light from behind a large clump of bushes and shrubbery, where we would hide. Once our preparations were complete, we went back to the car and drove to Druidsville Road, where we parked and ate some sandwiches that I'd bought at a cooperative store. After a few hours of listening to the radio, we got out of the car and ambled towards Skardofolde, with a small camouflage net to cover us while we hid in the bushes. When we got to the field, I realized that I hadn't seen anyone walking on the streets while we had been walking, and mentioned it to Bill. "I'm not surprised," he said. "They're probably scared of the field because of the amount of peculiar activity in it." We hid ourselves in the bushes and waited for night time. In that time, Bill told me of the strange deaths that had been caused by Granny Rambles when someone entered the field. The apparent asthma attacks, swelling throats that had closed people's airways, the sudden growth of warts, hair loss followed by heart attacks, and senseless suicides. One interesting fact that he told me was that the police rarely entered the field. They were apparently too scared to go in, lest they too should suffer an early death. "We may die as a consequence of what we're doing," I said. Bill simply grunted in return. I looked up through the camouflage net and saw what my friend who had written to me had meant. A blood moon had pierced the sky above the field. I pointed it out to Bill, and he was greatly shocked by the spectacle. Night came slowly, and still we waited. I was beginning to have doubts that I had been wrong in my investigation of Granny Rambles, when a murmur of voices reached my ears. A group of strong-looking men came through the trees and began to build a fire on the scorched earth where they had had a fire before. The fire was constructed from large branches and wads of paper with some strange markings printed upon them. The figures were clad in robes without hoods, and would have scared anyone if they were to come out of nowhere. When the fire had been built, flags were staked around it, representing the 3 kings of hell that managed the demons for their master. The hooded figures began to hum a deep and melodious tune, which I recognized as the rite of death used by satanic cults to ready the area that they used for their arcane magic. After several hours of preparation, several of the robed figures disappeared and returned with 3 scarred metal tables with heavy-looking, rusty chains welded onto them. Sacrificial tables. When these were placed in a triangle formation around the fire, the robed men disappeared once again and returned with 3 limp children. "They are the sacrifices," I said to Bill. "They'll be killed as offerings at the ending climax of the ritual. We can stop that by lighting the underground fuses." "Understood," said Bill. Another hour passed, and Granny Rambles was yet to make an appearance. In that time, the robed men had secured the unconscious children to the tables and sung a preparation song in deep throbbing voices. The robed figures had suddenly become very still and tense, and after much staring about, I saw why. An old woman wearing a black gown, with white hair trailing on the ground behind her, had started to walk towards the unlit fire. As Granny Rambles passed the unlit fire, she raised one hand towards it and spoke some words in an unrecognizable tongue, the result being the lighting of the fire in a burst of blue and green flame. "Hold my lighter," I said to Bill, passing him the tool. As Granny Rambles began to chant, I did too, in a low, quiet voice. I held in my hands an antique crucifix that had been used for exorcisms. I began to speak a holy prayer that I had translated into English from the Codex. "May God protect the innocent and the clean, and shine light into their souls. May this place of evil be sealed from the rest of the world and trap the workers of the beast within. May angels give us their blessings in our hour of battle, and may we succeed in our mission to rid the evil that we face from the earth." I stopped speaking and turned towards Bill. "Light the fuse." Bill lit the fuse, and we waited for the diesel-soaked string to do its work. We watched Granny Rambles while she slipped off her robe to reveal her nakedness and linked hands with her minions. We watched in awe as she began to rise above the ground and her hair began to blow around in some undetectable wind. All of a sudden, the ground around the Satanists exploded. The fuse that I'd placed in the ritual fire before had worked. As Granny Rambles dropped to her feet, the fuse that Bill had lit caused the filled-in trenches to burst into flames in their peculiar patterns. "What is going on?" I heard her say. "Now we make our move towards them," I said to Bill. We threw off our camouflage net and we strode towards the confused Satanists. "Your time is up," I called to Granny Rambles. "You think you can stop me?" the old woman spat. "Yes," I said, "I do." "Then you have made a grave mistake," said Granny Rambles. The large robed men dropped to the floor and began to pulse as they began to change shape. "Take this," I said to Bill, passing him the exorcist crucifix. "They can't touch you if you have this." "What about you?" he asked. "I haven't lived to my age without having a backup," I replied, pulling another crucifix from my right coat pocket. "How old are you?" Bill asked. 65, I replied. "I'll distract Granny Ramble's servants while you go and free the children. There aren't any locks, they've used clips." Bill nodded, and we watched the minions of Granny Ramble's approach. They had become grotesque, winged creatures, much like the one I had killed on top of the bus. Bill moved to the left as I began to run towards the horrific demons. I pulled the sacred knife, which I had used just a short time ago, from my left coat pocket and raised my crucifix in front of me. There were 8 demons in total. I would certainly have to fight for my life if I were to survive this battle. One of the creatures swiped at my face and missed by millimeters. I slashed the creature's hand, and it recoiled in pain. I saw Bill approaching the sacrificial tables and redoubled my efforts to kill as many of these monstrosities as I could. One of the demons got behind me, grabbed my waist, and hoisted me into the air. I felt the creature's hot breath on my right shoulder, and I swung the sacred knife into the monster's face. The demon dropped me and clutched its face. I turned towards it and plunged the knife into the demon's stomach, and my foe dropped to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Another demon came towards me, and as it tried to hit my shoulder, I slit its wrist, and in doing so cut through its tendons, causing the hand to go limp. The demon cried out, and was about to try and kick me when I pushed the crucifix into its chest and heard its flesh sizzle. "Fools!" cried Granny Rambles. "He is one man! Kill him!" The remaining 6 active demons closed in on me, and I took a bottle of holy water from my trousers pocket, pulled out the cork, and splashed it at their feet. The monsters crumpled to the ground and shook with pain. One of the demons got to its feet and came towards me with its claws poised to impale me, when it stopped suddenly in its tracks. An expression of fear and despair had come over its face as it looked past me. "Stop," commanded a familiar voice. I turned to see a tall man in a black suit, holding a black felt fedora in his left hand. Vincent Straw. "This has gone far enough. Leave or be killed," he said. "We don't work for you anymore," said one of the creatures. "Let's kill him," said another. The monsters ran towards Vincent and were about to crash into the motionless figure when they stopped just short. Vincent had raised an open hand towards the demons and was staring at them through cold and hateful eyes. The demons were raised into the air by some unseen force, and I watched as they clutched at their throats. "You had your chance," Vincent said. The demons burst into an inferno of flame and seemed to disappear within it. I turned towards the fire and saw that Bill had succeeded in releasing the children and had one over each shoulder and one in his arms. "I will eat your heart!" shrieked Granny Rambles as she fell to the ground. Her skin pulsed and began to tear open, revealing an expanding mass of leathery skin. I turned my head to look at Vincent, but he had disappeared. Obviously his mission had been to simply destroy his traitorous minions. I turned back to Granny Rambles and watched in disbelief as she finished changing. She had become bat-faced, and her hair hung down behind her pointed ears. Another set of arms had appeared beneath her shoulders. A huge pair of bat wings had burst from her back, and her entire body was covered in thick ridges of muscle. The creature came towards me and grabbed me in its huge hands. Granny Rambles began to flap her huge wings and bounded into the air. We flew higher and higher until we seemed to be a mile above Liverpool. "You have ruined my life's work," screeched Granny Rambles. "I don't care," I replied hatefully. I held my crucifix in between my teeth and wrapped my right arm around one of the monster's wrists. Using the sacred knife, I stabbed Granny Rambles' hand in various places, causing her to lose her grip. My actions resulted in the desired effect. The monster released me, and I held on with all of my strength to retain my grip. I climbed up her arm, digging my fingers into the thick muscles on her arms for handholds. I clambered onto her back and put my legs around her neck. "What are you doing?" the monster cried. "Let me show you," I returned. I pushed the crucifix into Granny Ramble's neck, and while she screeched, I stabbed her in the joints that connected her massive wings to her body. "No," she yelled. "You'll kill us both." "No," I said. "Just you." We began to fall quickly to the streets, and as we got closer, I noticed a number of people standing, watching us descend. Granny Rambles screamed as I moved down to the middle of her back and shoved my knife into her spine to use as a handle. We impacted on the tarmac road of a street filled with shocked people. I felt the shockwave ripple through Granny Rambles, and I was jolted hard. After a few moments of recovery, I looked up and stared at the people around me. Some were running away, while others were filming the incident on their mobile phone cameras. I climbed off of Granny Ramble's body and shook myself hard. I heard a noise behind me, and turned to see my adversary holding herself up with her arms. I rushed towards her and plunged the knife in between her collarbone. Her arms jerked, and she threw herself onto her back. She twitched for a few moments and soon became still. I climbed onto her huge chest and took out a bottle of holy water. I carved a square into her chest just beneath her breastbone and tore away the thick flesh which revealed the inner organs of Granny Rambles. I undid my bottle of holy water and poured in the entire contents. "Goodbye," I said to the monster, "and good riddance." I stepped lightly off of her and motioned for people to remove themselves from the area. Granny Rambles tossed and turned as her body began to bulge and expand and tear and bleed, before eventually it exploded in a mess of destroyed flesh and mushed intestines. I looked at the scene of horror in disgust and walked away as people began to take photographs of the remains of the demonic creature that had been Granny Rambles. Part 6. I walked straight back to my hotel and decided that I'd retrieve my car after a good night's rest. I was woken by a loud knock on my door, which I answered immediately. Bill stood there with a huge grin and began to shake my hand. "Well done," he said. "You killed her." "How did you find me?" I asked. "Your face is all over social media. Someone took a video of you, and they said that they had seen you going into the hotel on Marine Terrace in Waterloo. That's how I found you." "I'm glad that you got away from the ritual site," I said. "What happened to the children?" "They've been returned to their parents by the police," Bill replied. "There was a police car that was driving past, and I explained that I'd found them tied together in Skardofolde when I'd heard some screams from that direction, and that when I'd gotten there, they had been drugged and were unconscious. They're currently investigating the field now. They detained me for the night, but let me out about an hour ago. They'll need my statement at about 2 o'clock this afternoon." "Excellent," I said. "Let's get some breakfast. I'm starving."